Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder it's time to have a look through some of the pictures from the planes which have never been implemented in the game, which are in the CDK. Now we have been going through each of the planes and their history, in these separate videos, but I thought we would just do a video kind of looking at some of the models which are in the game. Now this comes from a Chinese source, which had to be translated, but it's pretty much all of the planes that haven't been implemented on their client. Now understand that their client is slightly different to ours, but there is a lot of crossover between the two. Now, before we get started into this, I do have a few things to announce or talk about, basically to do with the Tech Hub. So what we're doing is, we're first of all tomorrow, on the 10th of February at 11 AM PST, we're going to be doing a obstacle course race, which was created by the user www.ep4ws. And the race I have completed myself. It's incredibly fun, and so as a community we're going to be doing that tomorrow. So if you want to get involved, please join us on the Tech Hub. On top of this, also we are doing a tournament later on in the month on the 23rd, where you can find once again all of the information in the news and announcements. The first place prize, you get the 141 pack and 2500 GE. The second place gets 1,000 and the third place gets 500. On top of this, we're also doing a bunch of giveaways. As you can see, we are doing 13 games this weekend. Next weekend we'll do something similar like we always do. And on top of all of this, we also have the shirt store, or the TEC store, which is going a little bit crazy right now with the amount of orders. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now. We're trying our best to give back to you guys and make sure there is always events and stuff going on. We're also planning some little things such as viewing parties for specific events, so look forward to that. The whole point of this is to create a fun and interesting community, and so far with the positive attitude that I've seen, from a lot of the moderators, the admins, and also the general community, it seems to be going really well. So I just want to thank you guys for that. It's always nice dropping into the chat channels or dropping into the text channels and, talking to people. And if you ever want to get a hold of me, the easiest way to do it is to go on the Tech Hub and ping me. So at, the European Canadian, I'll always respond to you, even if it does take me a few hours. So let's go through these. Now, the reason why I know about this is because Henk, or Henke, left a message or a comment on one of the videos I did over the last few days, basically pointing me towards this. So I'll leave this in the description so you guys can see it too. Now, obviously, some of the planes you can already see we have in the game, but some of them we don't. So we'll just go over, the ones which we already have, and then we'll talk about the ones which we don't. So the first one is the A35B. This is the US version. We talked about this the other day. Obviously, we have the A35B in game. It has different camouflage on it, but eventually maybe we get one in the US tree. Who knows? The next vehicle to have a look at is the F6F3, which I do believe we have in game. The only difference between this and the one in game is the fuel tank at the bottom, which, to be honest, I think it's fine to not have, because I don't think it's really required. On top of this, we have the SB2C5, so the one that, once again, we talked about the other day, has extra fuel tanks on it, and also little bits of a different airframe, but very similar. Also, it has the sliding canopy for, the sliding canopy for the pilot, so it's easier to get in and out. Then we have the Hawk 3, which is one I haven't talked about, because, to be honest, I've talked about it a lot in the past. So the Hawk 3 is an American biplane, which was once again exported to China. There's a lot of American airplanes in the 30s and the 40s which were exported to China to basically help with the what do we call it? I suppose, I don't know what the PC term is, but let's just say rebellion or revolution between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. Obviously, America tried to give a lot of stuff to the Republic of China, and the People's Republic won. And that's why we have Taiwan. That's why we have the People's Republic of China instead of, China. And then you have the People's Liberation Army and all of this. Basically anything which is people's and something, those were the victors in that conflict. And then anything else, unfortunately, for them lost. The Hawk 3s were sent over to basically once again be exported because the US Army, Air Force, and the US Navy had no use for it. So therefore, it's another one of those weird American aircraft which is in the Chinese client and also in the CDK. Now, on top of this, you also have some interesting extender wheels, which actually go in and out, which would be a nice little mechanism to see in the game. On top of this, we have the P-51K. Now, the difference between the P-51K and the P-51s, the D versions that we have in game, is pretty much the propeller. I believe the K, it was made at a different factory and used a different propeller. It used an in-house propeller because the guys who made the propeller parts, or the actual the propellers themselves, they had so much demand they could not keep up with it because they were one of the main manufacturers of propellers, and therefore the factory itself decided to take it on itself to build the propellers. So therefore the propellers are slightly different, so that means that this is called the P-51K instead of another version of the P-51D. Everything else is exactly the same on it. Then we have the P-66. We talked about this yesterday. This is another one which was exported to China. What is kind of interesting, though, is that it has the US markings on it, whereas the other planes which were exported, so the Hawk and the P-51, do not have American markings on it. They have Chinese markings on it. And I kind of wonder why. Because the thing is, this was used by China. It was, obviously, yesterday we talked about how it was supposed to be exported to Sweden. But because it was ready to be exported in 1941, the US banned exporting to places like Sweden in 1941. So it never actually got there. Then we have this. This is the P-26A35. Now, we have the A34 in-game, which is a gift or rare P-26 that you can actually get in the crate, the rare vehicles crate in the Warbond shop. But the A35 is once again what looks like a Chinese version of the P-26 that was sent over there for export. It looks incredibly similar to the A-34 and also the other P-26s in the game. I would be incredibly surprised if there was any difference between this and the other ones we have. The next one is the PB-J1J1. So we talked about this the other day, and the picture that I showed of the J1J1 actually had a canopy which was, basically closed, I think is the way to put it. And a few people pointed out that the one in the CDK is open, and I made sure to mention that when they were built, the PB-J1J1s, which were, the B-25s, the last production version of the B-25s, they were built with the open canopy, but some of them were closed off when it came to either field modifications or post-production ideas. Now, the one that we have in the files, as you can see, the PB-J1J1, actually has the same configuration as the B-25Js that we have in-game. So you have the 50 cals on the sides, so that's 4 50 cals, then it has 2 50 cals here, then what looks like a 50 cal which is controlled by the Bombardier. So it literally just looks like a B-25 which has been reskinned, which, the PBJs are already incredibly close to the B-25s, but the question is, do we need, another B-25 with a different name? I mean, I would like to see it personally because, I like these types of aircraft. I think they're really fun to use. The B-25s are great, bombers at the end of the day, but the question is, would other people want a copy and paste with a camo, or would you prefer just to have a camouflage added to the B-25s? The next one is the PV-2, which is actually, should be, the PV-1 Ventura, not the PV-2 Harpoon, and you can see when we compare it to the B-34, which is what it's based off. It's incredibly similar to it, and it's also incredibly similar to the PV-2D we have in game. You know, it has less 50 cals looking in the front of it, and generally in these CDK files, they kind of show like the external secondary weapons that they can carry. So pictures of the PV2 that I've seen in the files, which is actually the PV1, have had external gun pods and stuff like that, at least on our end of the CDK. So maybe theirs is slightly different, but it does seem a bit odd. Basically, the main difference between this and the PV2D we have in game is the amount of guns offensively which are firing, and also the secondary weapons. And I'm still sure that the PV in the files is the PV1 Ventura, not the PV2. The next one is just the TBD. So this is the TBD 1937. This is an exact copy of what we have on the international server, so nothing changed here. The next one is the CW21. Yes, Windows, I've already updated you 3 times. Stop trying. The CW21 is another one of these American aircraft which was designed in America by... Is it Curtis Wright? I might be wrong about that, but I have at least covered the history of this aircraft in the past. I just can't fully remember it. But it's another one of these monoplanes that was not accepted into service by the United States Army Air Force or the United States Navy. So therefore, it got set off for exports. Now, I don't think this is the same as the P-66, where it was set to be exported to somewhere else, such as Sweden, and then ended up in China. I'm pretty sure this was just sent to the Republic of China after it didn't win the competition of, you know, what would be the mainstay fighter for the Americans. So it's an all-metal aircraft. As you can see, it's got a really interesting cockpit and a really interesting design, a lot of centrally mounted guns which can do a lot of damage, and it would be another one of those low-tier fun American aircraft. It would join the P-36s, the P-40s, which to me are incredibly one of the funnest experiences in the game, because they give you a little bit of everything, which is what you're looking for at low tier. The next one is stuff we covered yesterday. So this is the PBM1. Then we have this, which is the PBM3, and then this, which is actually labeled in the files on the Chinese server as the PBM5A. You can actually see them here. So PBM1, PBM3, and PBM5A. So let's find it. There we go. So they are slightly differently named compared to the CDK that we have, or probably. But the actual, you know, the pictures of them are incredibly similar. I actually noticed something today as well, which does make the 3 and the 5A different. So the main difference that we talked about the other day is the difference between them is the engines. So from here to here to here, the engines you can actually see in the files, they actually get bigger and they get more powerful. And that's because they are, especially when we compare the PBM1, to the PBM5A. But what also changes is here, the guns stay the same. And then on the 5A, the guns, you get more 50 cals on it, and you also seem to get some kind of maybe radar on it, or some form of maybe communication on the top of the turret, on the top of the cockpit here. So you can see it's not present here, or it's at least present in a very small way, whereas here it doesn't exist. So then you get this, and then on the 5A, bang! It's right there in your face, which is kind of interesting. The next one is a H-75. So we have H-75s in the French tree, and it seems like there are also camouflages for every other tree. So obviously with the invasion of France, the Germans won, and we already talked about how a bunch of H-75s were commandeered by the Germans and were sold to areas like Finland and other places. But the Germans also kept some for training purposes and also for use. So it makes sense for the Germans to get some H-75s in some kind of premium in some kind of premium way. Now, obviously, as I've said before, I don't really like the idea of captured aircraft, But you've got to understand, a lot of the time when I'm talking about these aircraft, I'm talking about them from the game rules point of view and not my own personal opinion. If I talk from my own personal opinion, I will say, this is my opinion. It's as simple as that. So anyway, this is the H-75A2. Then we have the H-75A4, which seems to be the main difference between them, is the engine that you can see, at least in the model. Whoops. So the fuselage also slightly changes. Look where the cross is on this one, and then look where it is on this one. You can see it slightly is different. And then, of course, the engine changes. Sorry, my eye is just not cooperating today. And the glasses are just not working. The next one is a plane that we just got. So this is the Focke-Wulf 190, which is now in our possession on the on the international client. The Focke-Wulf 190C, the high-altitude version of a Focke-Wulf, which joins all of its brethren at 5.357 area, which are, pretty good. They still haven't fixed the guns on it, I don't think. I still think it's actually got the 220mm on the one side and the 2 machine guns on the other. Hopefully at one point they actually do fix that. Then we have this, which is the DB3A. We talked about this as well when we went over the Soviet stuff. The main difference between this and the one that we have in the tree is the engines. The engines are slightly worse on this one. Everything else is pretty much the same. And so the 3A and the 3B, it's literally just engines once again. And then we get a little dinghy. This is the I-16 Type 28, which I believe we actually have on our side of the, I believe it's either a premium, I'm not at home right now, so I can't check on War Thunder, but it's either a premium for the Soviets or it's in the tech trees. I know for a fact we do have a Type 28 in the game, and the difference is, of course, this has Chinese markings on it. So this has the Chinese insignia, therefore it would be in a Chinese tech tree. Then we have the Type 17, which is the one we personally don't have on the international tree. We actually covered it the other day. Which has 220mm in the wings and then 792s in the center. So once again, a quite underpowered engine and some quite large guns, which means that, in my opinion, it would struggle for speed. Then it seems like under the wing roots here, you can actually see that it has some racks or it has some hard points where maybe it can hold rockets. I know a few of the I-16s can in game, so therefore it makes sense for the Type 17 to have that too. Then we have some of the lags that we talked about. So this is the GU-37, or the lag, I know it is the GU-37. I don't know if it had a lag name. It's obviously named after the designer. And what we see from this lag is the 37mm in the nose and a 12.7 right here. So very similar to the other lag that we have as a premium, but would be an earlier version of it. Then we have the Lag 3-1, which we talked about, where it just has a ton of guns in the nose, which to me, it just cannot have felt very good to fly. Like when you're actually holding down the trigger and, annihilating whatever's in front of you, it must have felt really good. But the issue is you need to get guns on target first, which might be hard to do with how heavy this nose is. Then we have the Lag 329, where you can see we lose some of the machine guns, and we also change the exhausts on it, so you can see it's like a tri-system here, where here it's just a mono. And as I said, also just lose a bunch of the guns, making the Lag 329 obviously lighter in the nose, and also probably easier to control overall. The actual tip as well of the propeller hub changes from black to green and white, which is kind of interesting. Then we move on to the Mig-15 Biss and S23. Obviously, the Mig-15 Biss in-game, it has the NR23s, the 23mm. This one just has the NS ones, which is the same as the Mig-15 that we have in-game. So it's kind of mixing the weaponry of the Mig-15 with the power of the Mig-15 Biss. Then we have the Hornet Mark 1, and we talked about yesterday, the difference is, of course, the ventral Oh, can't remember what it's called. The fin, I suppose you would call it. And then also the fact that it didn't have hardpoints on it compared to the Mark III. But when I actually look at this model of the Hornet Mark 1, what I see is hardpoints. I see hardpoints for bombs and rockets. So maybe that's just thrown out the window there. So this would be incredibly similar to the Mark III that we have in game. It would just not it would control slightly worse, but that would be about it. Then we have the Hurricane Mark 1 Late, which we actually have in the game. So there's not really a lot to talk about this. One of my personal favorite aircraft in the game, and also favorite aircraft in real life. I can't wait until we get some more versions of this wonderful aircraft. Then the Intruder Mark 1 that we talked about the other day, which seems to be a Havoc with less guns and a glass nose, designed to be more of kind of a bombing variant. And then we have the Night Fighter Mark II, which I'm still confused about, because I still can't find any designation on it. But the main thing is, once again, is if we compare it to the Intruder, which is very similar to the Havoc, with the only difference really being the glass nose for a bombardier or some kind of navigator. The Night Fighter has a closed nose, and it also doesn't have a gun at the back, which would make sense. If you're trying to make a night fighting aircraft, I feel like you would want to try your best at trying to make it so you had as much firepower going forward instead of backwards. And you're not really going to be defending yourself at night, because obviously the bombers won't really have an escort or anything like that. So therefore, it makes sense to try and double up on the front of it and not do anything on the back. So here, you can see there's a turret. Here, there is no turret, but there seems to be at least 8 guns, maybe, on the front, which would be more than the standard Havoc that we have as a premium gift in the British tree. The next one is then the Pandora Mark 1, or the Pandora. Let's actually just see what it's named here, just so we don't get it wrong. The Pandora. So it's actually named the Pandora, which is interesting. In our version of the CDK, it's known as the Pandora. And as I said, the Pandora seems to be a modified Havoc Mark 1, which has radar in it. But at the same time, if we look at the model of this, which is something I didn't point out yesterday. So we have the gun poking out the back of the Intruder, right? Which is the same as the Havoc Mark 1. It's not there on the Night Fighter Mark 2. But on the Pandora Mark 1, once again, it's not there. So I've got a feeling that this may not have a back gunner either. But when I've actually read about, the Havocs, the only gun that has ever really been taken out for special operations was the ventral one at the bottom, which is kind of around this area on the fuselage, where the dorsal was always kept in. So, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. Then we have the Lincoln, so this is the Lincoln Mark 1. Obviously, we had the Lincoln Mark 2 in game. The big difference between them being, once again, the difference in engines, and also this skin is abhorrent. I do not like this skin. My God, is it not good on the eyes. I really, really think this is a bad idea. Then we have the P-51. So, the P-51 Mark 1 we talked about yesterday was different to this one. The one that we looked at yesterday had a different amount of guns on it. So when I actually had a look at this model, I was like, is it the same model? Has something gone a bit awry here? But it seems like this is technically the P-51 Mark 1, but it's an RCAF version. So the Royal Canadian Air Force Mark 1 P-51 had 4 303s and 4 50s on it. And the Mark 1 also carried 2 50 calibers in the nose, 2 50 caliber M2s in the wings, as well as either 4 303 Browning machine guns or 30 cal Browning machine guns. So this thing had a lot of firepower behind it, and when you actually look at it, the gun's underneath the propeller hub, which is not something you normally see. Normally it's above it. So yeah, it's my God, it's just a weird aircraft, isn't it? At the end of the day. And it would definitely be nice to see this in game. I wouldn't like it to be a premium, just because we use them so much, but it's just very odd how the weapon configurations seem to change, over time. Or at least change depending on which model you want to see, and also which country you're talking about, because the Commonwealth used this thing, but it seems like different Commonwealth countries had an idea of what they wanted it for. The next one is another H-75, so this is the A4. After the Battle of France, as we talked about with the Maryland, which is just an MB-167, I believe. A lot of the aircraft which were supposed to be exported to France from America, a lot of their, not supplies, but a lot of their planes never got there, or they got there too late to be involved in the invasion of France by the Germans. So therefore, the rest of them, which were supposed to go to France, eventually went to England instead. So that's why we got a bunch of A-35s, we got a bunch of MB-167s, which we labeled the Marylands, and then of course we got stuff like the H-75s, which we would have labeled the Warhawks, which we talked about, yesterday. Since they are very, very similar machines. The next one is, of course, the Maryland Mark 1, which we talked about yesterday. Exactly the same as the MB-167 in the game. The only difference being the guns, where this has the 303s in the wings, whereas the MB has some different guns in it. And also the turret should be different as well. It probably could carry different bombs as well, since it would be fit for British standard. The next one is two planes that I didn't really talk about while covering the British, because, to be honest, we don't know a lot about them when it comes to the game. Like, a lot of these have been in the game for ages, but when it comes to these machines, they are pretty much new. They were only put in last year from my point, and it's the Welkin, and it's the Welkin Mark 1. So these are early war twin-engined, high-powered fighters, which never really had a purpose, and actually were split onto doing... okay, so I'll go through the story that Nathan told me, who's a mod at the Tech Hub. So, the British... in around about the mid-war or early war period, they supposedly saw a high-altitude fast bomber that was going over the UK, and they believed they needed to create a fighter which would be able to deal with this. So they needed something that would be high-altitude, that would be fast, with a lot of firepower. So the Welkin came about, and they created the Welkin. They created a few of them, and when they created them, they realized that they were kind of surplus to requirements, because the Germans never really made anything bomber-wise, which was crazy high altitude and crazy fast, so they were kind of duped into making these. So they made the Welkin, and after making a few of them, they decided that it was time to try and change, the role of the Welkin, whereas it was never going to be useful for the role which it was designed for, because by the time it was ready, we're talking about later war here, where the Germans were not exactly, bombing Britain. So we have the Welkin, and then you have the Welkin Mark 1. Now, from my readings, the Welkin Mark 1, or the Welkin Late, was a night fighter a night fighter, and designed to shoot down planes. But once again, when you get to the end of the war, there isn't really much use for a night fighter, because the German Luftwaffe, by this point, at least the bombing arm, was pretty much annihilated. So I don't know why we have these things, or why they were kind of designed, but I would love to see them in game. They seem incredibly large. They're just, basically, to me, I look at them and I see a Hornet, where they've just extended the wings, or a Brigand, which has, lost a few pounds. So to me, I would love to see both of these in game, even though the history of them is a little bit balmy. The next one is a big mumbo jumbo. This is the G8N2, And the main difference between this and the one that we have in game seems to be the colours, because obviously the other one is silver, and also the engines are more powerful on this. Now, the G8s, I will go through the history of these Japanese aircraft when we actually get to them, when we're going through the CDK stuff. I just kind of wanted to show you them because I thought it was pretty cool. I might use some of these pictures for that, but yeah, the G8 is incredibly similar to the G8N1 that we have in game, and the only difference I have found so far is supposedly the engines. Moving on, we have the Key 43 Co, which, as you can see, is very similar to the Key 43s that we have in the game. It has a different camouflage on it, which is lovely, but the guns seem to be the 12.7s, and the way I'm trying to work that out is basically the holes that we see above the engine. And the other thing that might be the same on this as the other Key 43s is the modifications that mean that you can upgrade from the 7s to the 12s when it comes to the armaments, which would be lovely. The next ones we actually have in game. So this is the Key 45 High, or the TIE, or the T, I'm not exactly sure what it goes, but it's the one with the shrug music out of the top, which, you know, some people use to great effect. I personally think it's kind of a useless mechanic, but it still can be good, and it's good for highlight reels, which is always fun. And then we have the Key 45 Ko-Te, which is the one, once again, that we have in the tech tree. And it's, once again, another fun one. For me, one of the only really fun twin-engine aircraft for Japan, or one that kind of stacks up for Japan, is the Key 45 Ko. All of the rest are limited when it comes to their offensive armaments. But once again, it's another shrug music one, so maybe that's why they haven't been added to the Chinese server. On top of this, we have the H-75A1, which I believe we don't have in the game for France, even though we do have a bunch of versions of the H-75. We might do, I just can't remember at this time. And then we have the H-75A2, which I believe we definitely have. This is actually the damaged model of it, which is kind of interesting, how all of the others have just been the normal model. This one they decided to show the damaged model. Then we have the MB-162, the gift vehicle that we had over this last festive period. As you can see, it has the 20mm and the 7.5s. Overall, I've enjoyed it, but it still has issues with engine power, and also the HE-100 exists, and until they change the BR of that thing, we are going to have serious issues in the air whenever you take out allied aircraft around that 20 BR. Then you have the H-75A1 Finland Edition. So this is one that we actually looked at earlier. As I said, after the invasion of France, Germany decided to sell a bunch of the captured aircraft that they got, so a lot of the H-75s were sold to Finland and also some other countries. Then we have another one, the H-75A2. The main difference between this and this is the fact that this has more guns on it, so has a lot more power. Then we have another version, this is the H-75A4 with a slightly different engine to the A2. And then the last one is the SB2M100A Spain edition, which is the one which we talked about in the first video, where the main difference, once again, seems to be the engines on it. Overall, it is lovely to see all of these aircraft in their glory in the CDK, and as I said, we'll go through the history of some of the later ones in the videos coming up, but I just wanted to show you some of these because it's nice to kind of put a name to a face, if that makes sense, when we have a look through some pictures. And as I said, I'll leave the link in the description to this so you can have a look for yourself at all of them. Just understand that this isn't all the vehicles in the CDK, but it is a decent chunk of them. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time.